Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. I think my microphone is not on.
And I don't think mine is either. Testing 1, 2, testing.
And good morning.
This is why we
And
always should have a mic check.
good morning for the third time. Are we on yet? I'm getting shaking heads. Oh, we're on now. Okay.
right.
Back off. Back off.
Am I on now? Yeah, I'm on too. Good.
All right. Well, good morning for the fourth or fifth time now. It is good to see each of you this morning. Hope you've had a pleasant weekend. Lee and I have returned from the wedding in Memphis where our grandson was married on Friday night. And he and his new bride are in Alaska now. Why you would go to Alaska for a honeymoon, I don't know. It's below freezing up there. But it's good to be back with you. And we have a beautiful day outside. And let's pray that we have a beautiful day inside today as we've gathered to study from the Scriptures. We have actually come to our very last section. I think we have 2 classes after today. Is that right, Greg? So we have today, Wednesday night, and then next Sunday morning will be our final class. But we've come to our last lesson. We just completed the golden calf. We've seen the journey of the Israelites out of Egypt down to Mount Sinai. And of course, a lot happens at Mount Sinai. They not only receive the 10 commandments, but they receive approximately 600 other commandments on top of those 10, which are the foundation of the others. And we are going to see them very shortly leave Sinai, and they're going to be headed for the Promised Land. If you look at the map behind me, you can see Sinai there in the very middle toward the bottom, and then you see up the right-hand side how that they begin to move toward the Promised Land, come to Kadesh Barnea, and you probably know the story, what happened there when they sent the spies over into the land. And 3 weeks from today, I think, is that correct, Greg? 3 weeks from today, no, 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks from today, new classes begin. And Brother Greg and Brother Buckley will be here in the auditorium looking at the book of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
No Deuteronomy. We called an audible.
So you're going to hold Deuteronomy for another quarter?
We are.
Okay.
It was too much.
So Leviticus and Numbers, I agree with you. Leviticus is tough enough by itself. But Numbers is the story of the people of Israel wandering in the wilderness for the 40 years. So the story continues in the Bible, and it will continue here in our auditorium Bible class. Today we come to Lesson 12. That's pages 41 to 44, the last lesson in your book, the Tabernacle and the Priest. And we have a number of things we want to say about that. And Greg and I together will try to answer whatever questions you have about the tabernacle. And Greg has done a lot of study on this. I've done a little study, and it's something that's kind of been a favorite of mine over the years. And we have a number of pictures that we will show you this morning that are artist representations of the tabernacle. Greg, would you lead us in a prayer as we get underway?
Let's bow together. Our God and our Father in heaven, we come to you this morning. We're so thankful for all that you have done in our lives. From the very beginning of time, you have had us in mind. And you have provided a way for us to have forgiveness of our sins. We study part of your plan through this quarter. Again, we pray that we can make application to things in our lives so that we can grow closer to you, that we can be more thankful for your great plan. Jesus.
Well, let me begin this morning by just asking a question of the audience. I know that some of you have been Bible students for a number of years, and when you think in terms of the tabernacle in the Old Testament, what thoughts come to your mind? What impressions, what facts come to the surface when you think in terms of the tabernacle? If I say tabernacle, you say what, James? The presence of God. That's an important element of the tabernacle. God's presence was made known there. and particularly in what was called the most holy place, Greg, which was the second compartment of the tabernacle itself. Now, when we speak in terms of the tabernacle, we're talking about a number of things that are actually adjoined to the tabernacle. And here I have a picture that is an artist's representation. You will see the curtains all the way around this tabernacle area. In the middle, though, you see the tabernacle itself. And of course, as you look at the picture, and I know it's difficult for you to see because everything is very small there, but you see the tabernacle with the curtains, the 4 red curtains hanging down in the front. The rest of the curtains of the tabernacle are not shown in this photo or in this drawing because the artist wanted you to see what was inside. And you have 2 compartments. You have this part here, which is called the holy place. And then you have the second part back here, which is separated by curtains, which are not shown in this drawing. This is the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. Here you had the golden lampstand, you had the table of showbread, you had the altar of incense, but then behind this second curtain is where you had the Ark of the Covenant, or what is sometimes called the Ark of the Testimony, where the 10 Commandments were kept inside that ark. In fact, sometimes this whole thing is called the Tabernacle of Testimony, and it's called that because the testimony, the 10 Commandments, were kept in that place. Out in front, in the courtyard of the tabernacle, you see 2 major things. You see a laver, which is where the priest would wash his hands and feet before going in to minister. And then here you see the altar, or rather the place where the animals were sacrificed, sometimes called the brazen altar, where the priest would minister and the animals would be burned or burned up sometimes, depending on the nature of the sacrifice. Not just anyone was allowed to go into this tabernacle courtyard. This was for the priests, and yet occasionally there would be others who would go in. And they would go in and they would get hold of the horns of the altar. You remember times when you've seen that? They get hold of the horns of the altar. And that was a place of sanctuary. Sanctuary, we hear of sanctuary cities today. Sanctuary indicated a place where they would be protected. And you couldn't just chase someone in there. I think there may be one occasion in the Old Testament where that did happen, but it was a place of some safety or some security. So there you have some general idea of what the tabernacle courtyard and the tabernacle look like. Now, we have a great deal more to say about that, and what we want to do is go to our lesson plan now. Our lesson for today finds us first on page 41, and we're actually covering 2 very large texts of Scripture, chapters 25 to 31, which is 7 chapters, and then we have 6 more chapters, 35 to 40. We'll be looking at some parts of those. We've got a number of important people to take note of. We've got Nadab and Abihu, who are both sons of Aaron. They are priests. We have another son of Aaron called Eleazar. He will succeed Aaron as the high priest. And then we have Ithamar, a 4th son of Aaron. What happened to Nadab and Abihu? Does anyone recall? Leviticus chapter 10 is going to show those 2 men dying because they did what, Greg?
Offered strange fire to the Lord.
Yeah, they offered fire that they had no authority for. And that was actually done, as I understand, inside the sanctuary, inside this part here, on the altar of incense. They had used some unauthorized fire to burn that incense that they were offering. Then we're also going to see 2 other characters in our lesson today, and that's Bezalel and Oholiab. These are important men in what regard? Why are they important to the story? They were craftsmen, they were artisans. When you begin to read the detail on all these things that are being built for the interior of the tabernacle, you see that, well, it's not something that Greg and I could probably put together. We need some men in skilled trades, men who know how to work gold. And
Now I get it. At first I was a little offended, but no,
why
I'm just
why
kidding.
would you be a little offended,
No, I'm
Greg?
just kidding.
We-
No, it is. It's very intricate. I mean, when you
Yeah.
read the details, very, very intricate. And the interesting thing here is we read that they built it exactly as God would have them to do, and there were no changes, no modifications, and had they done so, God would have been very pleased.
Well, that's right. They built it according to the specifications. And one of the phrases that you will see as you read through the book of Exodus is, see that you make all things according to the pattern showed to you in the mount. And so God had revealed this pattern to Moses as to how the brazen altar, the altar of sacrifice, was to be made, how the laver was to be made, how the three items of furnishings in the holy place were to be done, and then the most holy place. But it wasn't just the furniture itself. It was the tabernacle and the curtains and all the things that were associated with it. All of those things, how they needed to be made. And so it took some skilled craftsmen, artists, if you will, men who knew how to handle gold. They were some of the gold was casting, some of the gold was casted or molded. Other gold would have been worked with the hand, like a jeweler might make a beautiful piece of jewelry. And I think all of this was made of pure gold. We're not talking about 10-karat gold that a cheap ring might be. This was pure gold. So there was a great deal of wealth that went into the building of the tabernacle. I think that's something we often overlook. We look at this and say, well, this was all rather crude. Well, I think crude is a wrong term to use with respect to the tabernacle. It was old. It was according to God's will. But when this was made, even though they did not have modern technology, they would have done this with lasers. Today, if we were making something like this would all be done with computer-generated lasers to cut the gold and all that. This was all done by hand, everything done by hand. Well, that's right. These two men, Bezalel and Oholiab, seem to have been specially endowed by the Spirit of God. They not only were trained somehow by God to do this, but they taught others how to do it also. So they had mentored others in the work as craftsmen and artisans.
Yeah, and it is amazing, again, the detail that's given, and to think about that idea. Donna and I like to build a few things. We get out in the garage, we have our tools, and we build various things, but we have our tools, and if we need a tool for something else, we go down to Home Depot and we buy a tool specifically for that task. And yet some of the things that I build probably are nowhere near the detail that would have been required of these guys here. And so many men, I believe, involved in this task, but just to think about doing that without any tools or without any modern tools makes it even more amazing.
Everything they used would have been a hand tool. Everything. All right. Well, let's look at the questions on page 41 to kind of set the tenor for the rest of our study. And here in the middle of the page, if you notice on 41, it says the importance of the tabernacle and the priest. And it asks the question from Hebrews chapter 9, verses 23 and 24. What does this text claim about the tabernacle, and what is it a copy of? Who has an answer for us on that this morning? Hebrews chapter 9, 23 and 24. But what is the claim about the tabernacle? Speaking of this tabernacle that we're looking at here, it was a what? Yeah, the word copy. Several of you said the word copy. And looking at the text there, in verse 23 and 24, it says, therefore, it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself now to appear in the presence of God for us. And so in some sense, this tabernacle served as a copy of something that was in heaven. Okay? And we, as you study the book of Hebrews in chapter 9 in particular, it talks about how that Christ entered the tabernacle, the true tabernacle, not made with hands. In fact, if you back up to Hebrews chapter 8, I'm looking at Hebrews chapter 8, and beginning at verse 1, it speaks of Jesus as our high priest. Now, who is the high priest when this tabernacle is built? It is Aaron. And who's the son who will succeed him? Eleazar. Very good. Okay. By the way, who should have succeeded him? Nadab, assuming that Nadab was the older of the two. But look at Hebrews chapter 8, and this tells us something about this tabernacle and its relationship to heaven. It says, now this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. Notice, Jesus is identified as high priest. So we're talking then in terms of Old Testament terminology. And it calls him in verse 2 a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord erected and not man. Now, who erected this tabernacle? Men had erected this, even though it was done at the order of God, Greg. It was still men like Oholiab and Bezalel who had done all this work. And so it had been erected by men. But it speaks there in verse 2 of Jesus as a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle. Why does it use the word true? Why the word true? Is true used in contrast to that which is false? Yeah, true is reference to that which is in heaven. This was only foreshadowing, okay? It was foreshadowing what was in heaven. And so here you had kind of a picture, a shadow of what was to come. In fact, if we continue to read, we're going to see the word shadow. Look at verse number 3. It says, for every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. Therefore, it is necessary that this one also have something to offer. Now, in verse 3, when it says every high priest, it's talking about the high priest who ministered in this tabernacle. And what did they do? They made offerings of the gifts and sacrifices. That was one of their functions. Well, if that was the function of the high priest, then Jesus must also have something that he would offer as a sacrifice. And so, what does Jesus offer? What did he offer? Himself, the shedding of his blood. Now, verse 4 says, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there are priests who offer the gifts according to the law. Now, watch verse 5. This is what I want you to see. Who serve the copy and shadow of the heavenly things, as Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle, for he said, see that you make all things according to the pattern showed you on the mountain. Well, then it goes on to talk about how that this new covenant that Jesus has brought in is far superior to the old. But we're learning something here about Jesus. When we study the tabernacle, we're learning something about Jesus. And it says in verse 5 that these things, the priesthood, the tabernacle, they serve as a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. And so, if you've got the shadow, there must be the real, right? Now, which do you want? You want the shadow or do you want the real? You know, let's say that you were waiting for your girlfriend before you got married. You're waiting for the girl you're going to marry, okay? And you're standing at the side of a building, and right around the corner, she's coming. And the sun is behind her. You're standing there. And as the sun is shining behind her, what do you see as you look down at the ground? You see her shadow coming. Now, what do you want? Just the shadow? or you want the girl. You know what you want. That's what marriage is about. It's not about the shadow. Well, see, people today who say, oh, we've got to go back and we've got to keep the old law. You're going back to the shadow. And the shadow is not the true. The true is what we have under the new covenant. And that's why he speaks of the true tabernacle, which the Lord erected and not man. And so when you look at this, the true tabernacle is in heaven. And the book of Hebrews pictures Jesus as entering into that tabernacle. He entered into the most holy place, which was not made with hands. This tabernacle, the priest would minister here on a daily basis, but once a year on the Day of Atonement, he would pass into this second compartment back here, and he would offer the blood of bulls or goats as an atonement for the sins of the people. Now, that's typical. That's a shadow of what Jesus was to do. And when Jesus came, he entered into the true tabernacle, the holy place not made with hands, offering his own blood. And so when you study the tabernacle, you're studying a type or shadow of what Jesus was to do. And so that's why it's important to connect this to the book of Hebrews. If you look at the second question there, what does Hebrews 8, 3 through 5 claim about the priest? They were also what? The priests themselves were a copy or a shadow of Christ who was to come. And, you know, there's a movement afoot, and in a couple of weeks from now, I think on a Sunday night, I'm going to preach about this. There are 2 or 3 groups here in Beaumont right now that seem to be on the rise that are saying, we are the true Israel. We are the people of God. We're from the tribe of Reuben, or from the tribe of Asher, or from the tribe of Levi. We're the true priesthood. Well, if you were of the tribe of Asher, Reuben, or Levi, so what? So what? We're not under that old covenant system. And yet there are people who just don't see it. And they get off on some wacky idea that they're the true people of God today. Listen, you study 1 Peter chapter 2, the true people of God are those who have followed Jesus Christ, not someone else, no one else. Those who follow Jesus Christ, they are the Israel of God today. And so people come up with these crazy ideas. Well, look at question 3. Considering the above, why is it important to study the tabernacle and the priest? We're learning more about Jesus, aren't we? Greg, you want to comment on these 3 questions?
Well, I was looking at one thing I was thinking about this idea again about the sacrifices, where the sacrifices took place in the tabernacle. Jesus and his sacrifice, he's in heaven. I think what I was thinking more along the lines of this bringing us back to what the tabernacle represents, more so than the physical beauty or intricate details of the tabernacle. And it would be the same with heaven. I was thinking that oftentimes when we talk about heaven, we sing about heaven. We sing about the streets of gold, the Jasper Sea, and these things that we can relate to that put beauty in our mind, things that we find precious, much like things that would have been constructed, the tabernacle would have been constructed with, these precious metals and precious things. And yet it's really not about gold, silver, and all of these precious linens and fine things. It's about the presence of God. And it's about the sacrifices for the atonement of the sins of the people. And Jesus is not about, not the beauty of heaven, but it's about the sacrifice and the fact that we will be in heaven with God.
That's right. That's the reality. And that's why we are gathered this morning. That's why we do all that we do. Because the reality is that one day, people like you and me, sinners who have been saved by the grace of God, we're going to be in the presence of Jesus. You know, the wonderful thing about the Bible is not that just Jesus is wonderful, but that we get to be with him. That's what this is about. And sometimes when people stray from the faith, they've lost sight of why we're Christians. look at the question number 4 toward the bottom of the page, and Greg has already to some degree introduced the concept. According to Exodus 29, verses 45 and 46, why did God bring Israel out of Egypt? Yeah, he says that I may dwell among them. I'm looking here at those last 2 verses of chapter 29, verses 45 and 46. Exodus 29:45. God says, I will dwell among the children of Israel and will be their God. And they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, that I may dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. And so God brought them out in order to set up this system, a system of religion, a system of worship. You realize that this begins in about 1450 BC. This is about the time when this is taking place, 1450 years. We all know what BC means, right? Before Christ. Everything before the birth of Jesus is BC. Everything after the birth of Jesus is AD. By the way, AD does not mean after death, after the death of Jesus. That's a common misconception. Half of the world thinks it's after death. It is Anno Domini, 2 Latin words. Anno, related to our English word annual, which means year, and Domini, related to dominion, the idea of a ruler or lord. Anno Domini is a Latin phrase which means in the year of our Lord, meaning from the birth of Jesus. Think about it. If BC means before Christ was born and AD means after he died, how do we measure those 33 years in between? No, the birth of Jesus is the line of demarcation, BC, AD, okay, before and after his birth. So about 1450 years before the birth of Jesus is when this is taking place. And just think about that. Think of the immense amount of time. Columbus discovered America in what year? 1492. That's a little over 500 years ago. And we think, wow, the whole world is, look how long that expanse of time is. But this tabernacle served the people of God for 3 times that long, almost 1,500 years, indeed 1,500 years. This was the establishment of the system of worship under the Old Testament. Now, prior to this, 500 years earlier, before the tabernacle, you had Abraham. And Abraham worshiped God. He made sacrifices unto God, but they didn't have this system established yet. Abraham worshiped God. Isaac worshiped God. Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes that went down into Egypt, they worshiped and served God. But this system was not in place. This began at Mount Sinai with the tabernacle and then all the things that went along with the tabernacle. But this was something special, where God says, through this system, I will dwell among them. That's the point. Look at question number 5 at the bottom of page 41. According to Exodus chapter 25 and verse 8, why did Israel need to build a sanctuary? Sanctuary is just another word for tabernacle, okay? Depending on the translation that you have. Why did Israel need to build a sanctuary? God commanded it, and God said in Exodus 25:8, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. And so it was in the sanctuary that God made his presence known as he dwelt among them. In Exodus 25:22, I'm looking at page 42 now. What was the purpose of the mercy seat above the Ark of the Covenant? The Ark of the Covenant was the box itself that kept the 10 Commandments, but on top of that was the mercy seat. What was the purpose of that? Okay, God's presence was made known there. What else? James? I thought you had your hand up. No? Okay. It was at the mercy seat where God would meet with them. And so the order was this. God would meet with them in the tabernacle, but not just anywhere in the tabernacle. God would meet with them in the holy place, but not just any place. It was the most holy place. Let me go ahead, if you will allow me, and show you some more of the drawings that we have. We're used to seeing pictures of everything today. The tabernacle system of worship as it was here, of course, we don't have any actual pictures of that. This system served Israel for a period of 1,500 years in the broad sense, but in a specific sense, this system served Israel for about 500 years, up to the time of King Solomon. What happened in the time of King Solomon? He built a temple, and all of this was enlarged and made even more elaborate in Solomon's temple. But looking here, here's what the tabernacle would have looked like at night. Remember that all of the tribes had their place where they were stationed to the north, south, east, and west, all these places around the tabernacle. And here the presence of God, remember you had the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. And this, of course, is an artist's representation of what that pillar of fire might have looked like at night. Again, you see the curtains going all the way around the tabernacle courtyard, and you see the various parts of it that can be seen. Looking a little further, here's something of what the priest might have looked like. And I think this representation here is pretty fair. He's standing in front of what? What is the item of furniture here? This is the altar of incense. This is where Nadab and Abihu met their demise. The high priest is pictured here wearing his breastplate. And if you noted carefully, the breastplate was the size of, it was a span by a span. You've got cubits. You measure things by cubits. The cubit was from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. And measuring mine is precisely 18 inches. That was called the regular cubit. There was also what was called the long cubit, which was about 21 inches. And that would have been for guys that would have been basketball players or something like that who had longer arms. But the cubit was approximately 18 inches. And then you had another measurement called the span. The span was from the tip of the thumb. The hand is stretched out from the tip of the thumb to the tip of the little finger. And the breastplate that the priest wore that you see in this photograph or in this picture was a span by a span. And then you had 4 rows of 3 with these jewels. This was encrusted with jewels. And you had these 4 rows of 3, 1 jewel for each of the tribes of Israel. So that's what you're looking at here in this particular part of the picture. You see the blue garb that he wears, this outer garment that he wears, the turban that he wears, and special markings on the turban. We'll talk about all of that in due time. But here you get an idea of what the high priest might have looked like when he went into ministry. Here's another representation, and this is actually a photograph of that someone has made of a model. This is a model of the tabernacle. By the way, Brother Alan Davis made a model that we used in one of our Bible classes. It's still back in the back now, and it's very accurate, just like this. This model is, though, complete with little figures and animals. Here's your brazen altar where the animals were sacrificed. Here is the laver where the priest would wash. And here you have the sanctuary, the tabernacle proper. Remember, all of this is called tabernacle. This is the courtyard of the tabernacle. This is the tabernacle curtains. And then here you have the tabernacle proper, which is made of 2 parts. Again, God's presence in the second part, the most holy place, which of course was always kept covered. When Alan made his model, we could turn the covers back. There were actually several covers that went on top of this. Here you see how the covers might have been fastened to the ground like so that the wind would not blow it away. Here you see again where the presence of God was manifested in the tabernacle. Looking further, Here is the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. The Ark of the Covenant was a chest. It would have been about the size maybe of a small footlocker, something like so. The dimensions are all given in the text, that it was was it 1.5 cubits, or I forget the exact length at the moment. But you had the rings that went in the corners of the ark, and this was used to carry the ark. 4 men would put this on their shoulders, and when they traveled in the wilderness, the 4 men would carry that on their shoulders. The Ark of the Covenant was the box itself, but the top, this is called the mercy seat. And the mercy seat with the cherubim, the 2 cherubim, this is where the high priest would go in once a year and would sprinkle blood. Inside the Ark of the Covenant, what items do you have inside the Ark of the Covenant? Okay, you've got the 2 tables of stone. You've got a pot of manna, and then Aaron's rod, remember, that budded to show the authority of Moses and Aaron when Korah and his companions rebelled against them. So there you get some kind of an idea of the representation of this. And this drawing is pretty true to form. Here you see the table of showbread, which was one of the items that was in the first part of the sanctuary, the holy place, called the holy place and then most holy place, or holy place and holiest of all. And then beyond the table of showbread, you have the golden candlestick, which was fed with oil. It was a rather elaborate piece. This is one of those things, Greg, that you and I would have a difficulty making. I could get some tubing maybe and bend it, but making it all out of solid gold, that's another thing entirely. But this was the light that was provided for the tabernacle inside. And other than daylight coming in, when the curtains might have been pulled back a bit, there was no other source of light as far as I can see inside the tabernacle. And then here you have the golden altar of incense. And this is where Nadab and Abihu, Leviticus chapter 10, were offering their incense. Again, this was elaborately constructed. Notice the 4 horns on this altar, 4 corners with the horns that stick out. Again, you've got the rings and then the staves that went through the rings. This, again, was used for moving it as it traveled from one place to another for the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And it wasn't just the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. When the people of Israel came into the promised land, they were in at least 3 different locations. The tabernacle had at least 3 different locations in the promised land. So there was some mobility even after they moved into the land of Canaan. And then here you see a representation of the tabernacle itself. You see the front of the tabernacle. The most holy place would have been back here. This is the holy place in the front. Notice the curtains, the tapestries that were done. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 coverings for the tabernacle. And the materials that were to be used was very specific. And they were to hang down on the sides, and they were to hang down on the back. Looking at the next one here, you get a better idea of what the tabernacle proper would have looked like. The first compartment, the larger compartment, is the holy place or the sanctuary. Then the smaller one toward the back is the most holy place. I believe the back part was a perfect cube. It was 10 by 10 by 10 cubits, okay? 10 cubits by 10 cubits by 10 cubits, which would have been 15 feet wide, 15 feet deep, 15 feet tall, measuring the 18-inch cubit. So there you get some idea of how it was made. Now, the walls of the tabernacle, you'll see here something about, these are called sockets, and these were lined up like so. And the walls of the tabernacles were like large planks, and they would be fitted into these sockets so that it would be stable, one next to another, and then they had long rods that passed through them. that kept them all together. And this was for a movable building. Think of this. This is a portable building. Today, when we think in terms of a portable building, we think of something that they put on the back of a flatbed and pull it to a new location, and then they pull it off. Or we think of something that has wheels on it. This is a movable building. This is a building. We call it a tent or a tabernacle, but it is a building. And so it had to be constructed. It had to be put together. And every time the Israelites moved, they had to take all of this apart. And it was the job of the, what was it, the Kohathites? I think it was the job of the Kohathites, part of the Levites. The Levites, think in terms of the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi, they served as helpers to the priest. The priests all came from Aaron, a descendant of Levi. So you've got, it's sometimes called Levitical priesthood, because everyone who served in the priesthood was out of the tribe of Levi, but he had to be a descendant of Aaron to do that. But it was the job of the Kohathites to pack all this stuff up when they got ready to move. And when they had to disassemble all of this and then prep it for travel, and then they carried all of this to the new location. Now, remember in, in 1 Samuel, when they're moving the Ark of the Covenant? And who are the two men who are moving the Ark of the Covenant? Can anyone remember the names of the two men moving it? Uzzah and Ahio are their names. Priests, Levites? No. Sons of Kohath? No. They were just moving it. And they were doing what should have been done. It should have been moved, but they were not authorized to move it. And instead of it being carried by the staves at the four corners by the sons of Kohath, they put this thing on an ox cart, and the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah puts forth his hand to try to protect the ark to keep it from falling, and he died right there on the spot. So all of this stuff, it was all portable. And think in terms of Israel, God saying, okay, it's time to get up from Sinai. You need to move to this new location. And so they travel to a new location in the wilderness. They have to disassemble all of this. And they have to carry it to the new location, reassemble it. And however long they're there, it would serve as the place of sacrifice and a place where God's presence was made known. But then they would leave, and it all has to be taken down again and carried and put back together. So these boards here that go into the sides, they fit in these sockets. All of this is joined together by staves. This total, the most holy place was double the size of the holy place. And so this would have been about 20, let's see, what did I say? This was 15 foot, so this would have been 30 foot. It was 15 foot tall, 15 foot wide, but 30 feet in length. I'm translating cubits to feet. I'm doing this and trying not to make a mistake on that. Any question about this, about what we're looking at here? I just want you to have kind of a feel for the tabernacle and its furnishings and how it was put together. Questions or observations? Anything? Nothing? All right, yes, Stan? Well, God's presence would lead them, remember, from one place to another. So the holy place would be deconstructed, and when it was deconstructed, there was no holy place. There was none. Because it's like a building being taken apart. The building doesn't exist except in pieces. And so you can't say, well, I'm in this room of the building now, because there are no rooms. But when they would go from one place to another, God's presence, the cloud or the pillar of fire at night, would lead them and show them where they needed to go next. And so that's an important point to make. God's presence was still with them, but not in the holy place. It was in the holy place when the building was reconstructed that his presence would be made known. Yes, David? Okay, David's comment is Aaron was still the high priest even after he built the golden calf. Any lesson to be learned from that? James is pointing out that we are priests today, and we're certainly not perfect. I think you used the word certainly, and I'm certain of that we're certainly not perfect. And yet, today, Aaron would never get to be a high priest today. We would absolutely slaughter him and say he's not qualified, he cannot be. And even though he repented and was forgiven by God, forgiveness, we sometimes just forget about forgiveness. That's what Greg called Aaron and the magic calf. Look, he tried to make excuses. And have you ever tried to make excuses after you've done something wrong? After you've sinned, tried to make excuses? I'm going to raise my hand and say I have. And Mary Jane, did I see you shaking your head? Yes. Mary Jane and Max, we both admit that we've made excuses, okay? And you have too. And the fact is, probably all of us have at one time or another. Yes, James? Come on. Yeah. This is one of the lessons we need to learn, that we have a high priest who is sinless. And he's the only high priest who was ever sinless. Jesus never transgressed the law of God. I think that's important to note that.
We have 1 minute.
1 minute?
That's what he said. That's what Jim said. He's right there at his Paul.
Jim, go tell the classes we need 30 more minutes today. We have a minute to wrap up. I have a lot more pictures I want to show you, but we're not going to do that. We'll continue this on Wednesday night. We didn't get very far in our questions today. We still have 3 pages of questions to go, but we'll finish up on that next Wednesday and Sunday. And then 2 weeks from today, the new classes begin. And we've got Greg and Ulysses, who will be out here in the auditorium. They'll be teaching on Leviticus and Numbers.
Leviticus and Numbers.
Okay, and did we change that on the board in the back?
No.
You need to scratch Deuteronomy back there. Yeah. And then I'll be doing the book of Matthew, and then we'll be having, what is the third class back there listed on the board?
I know about the one in the auditorium.
Tender Warrior, a class for men. A lot of you men should not be out here next quarter. You should be in the class in the back on Tender Warrior. Brother Terry Matthews scheduled to teach that. David Rogers will be helping him with that. Tender Warrior, it'll make you a better man, a better daddy, better husband. Now, wives, go get your husband signed up for that Tender Warrior class, okay? What is it?
So me and UB and the ladies are going to be out here studying Leviticus and Numbers. And
All
David,
right.
he's staying with us.
Well, God bless you. We'll take up Wednesday night. Thanks for your cooperation today.